All right, we're making this call for City to City Europe, the Connect project, and it's our desire to connect with local churches and be supportive of local churches. Definitely not to take the place of a local church. So we're glad to have two local church people here today. The topic that we have is which idols is God working on through the coronavirus crisis, or what ones are bubbling up? That's our big topic. I'm here with Neil McMillan, the pastor of the Cornerstone Church, and everybody says it's different than I do. So is it Edinburgh or Edinburgh?
Edinburgh.
Yeah, Edinburgh. All right, there we go. Got it. It looks like, yeah, it's the American coming out of me. Sorry about that.
It does read like Berg for some people.
And then in Scotland, and then uh, Dr. Andras Lovas, pastor of Gataret Reformed Church. Probably said that wrong too. In Budapest, Hungary. All right, yeah, we're glad that you guys are both together in this call today.
Glad to be on this call with Andras and with you.
Sure. All right, I'm going to start with Neil, and just real to start off and ask you. We talked about we chose you guys because you've talked about idols before. We were in a small group, and someone said, "Oh, that guy's got some good stuff on idols." When you guys talk about idols, or when you use that terminology, what do you define as an idol? What does that mean for you?
So, an idol is going to be anything to which we give ultimate value or significance, things in which we will find meaning and worth for our lives. Sometimes we talk about an idol as being something that if we can't have it, life feels suddenly empty and meaningless and frustrating. Biblically, we see people with their idols, and these are carvings or physical representations of some kind of deity or God. But there's always an internal aspect to idolatry in the Bible too, about what do we love? What do we, and especially are there things that we love more than we love God? And when we see these disordered loves, that's kind of putting us on the track of what our idols might be. I think the New Testament sometimes describes them as kind of like supersized desires, and that could be for money or for sex or for freedom. Can take all kinds of different formats, but that's kind of where I go when I think about idols of the heart.
What about you, Andras? What would you add to what Neil said, or maybe, or you can disagree in this call too. It's okay.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree. I think I absolutely agree with everything he said, and maybe later we can look at how our personal idols show themselves in this time. But when I made a comment in an earlier discussion on idols, then that time I was more thinking of the cultural idols or the corporate idols of our culture, the religious core of our culture, which are obviously not independent of our personal idols. But what I see now is, or the way I think about this situation is how these cultural idols have been, receiving a great, how vulnerable they are, and how we could see now that all those things which we are building our lives on in Western culture are very unstable and very weak. So the personal idols are there and very important, and they are linked to the cultural idols of the West.
I think one example of that, Andras, that's really helpful way of putting it is, as I reflect on what coronavirus has kind of shown about the idols of our culture, I think certainly many people in our society believed that technology could save us.
Sure.
And that technology would insulate us against the worst things that the world can bring. And technology is an idol for many people today, at a personal level and at that wider cultural level. So yeah, it's really a good way of seeing it.
So basically, okay, the Michael Goheen, the Canadian mythologist, when he speaks about analyzing Western culture for the sake of the mission of the church, he would say that we need to understand that Western culture is not neutral or secular in terms of having no religious commitment at all, because all culture has some religious commitment. And so if we want to understand the religious core of the Western culture, we need to see its story, starting with basically two faith statements, he would say. Humanism, which believes that we need to make meaning of our lives without God, and rationalism, which means that basically scientific knowledge and technology, which is coming out of that, can give us basically the paradise. The whole optimism and the progress, the idea of progress of Western culture, is coming from that. And it's not saying that everything is bad in it. Of course not. We need to say how good many things which are coming from the human mind and reason. But when we arrive to the 21st century, what we have is that we have a Western worldview of growth, of progress, which is material abundance, global capitalism, you would say. And I think what we need now, but what we see now, where we see the weaknesses now, is that that kind of worldview cannot be taken so easily as true today, because as Neil said, technology cannot save us right now, which doesn't mean that we don't pray for the doctors and the researchers and the scientists in that situation, but we need to see that and basically I think all the disorientation comes in our lives because we are realizing that, hey, the world is not working as it should be working with science and technology and progress and the individual freedom. I cannot even leave my home. So what's happening here? How can it happen? It just doesn't fit my worldview. And that's where we can see how these idols can betray us. I think that's my point.
That's a great point. I mean, how have you guys seen that coming out in a way that's been, has that created opportunities for you, or what kind of, I guess, where has been the point where you've been driving to from there? Like, you've seen that, but you're not just learners of culture, but you guys are, also practitioners and always trying to think of how theology and praxis is coming together. What's that look like in your city and churches?
So listen, I was reading this book towards the end of last year, Disruptive Witness by Alan Noble, and again, he's picking up on something that Andras has mentioned, which is how highly we value freedom in our culture. And I think that loss of freedom has been a real shock for many people, that they can't really live life the way that they wanted to, and that they need to find help outside of themselves. And Alan Noble in Disruptive Witness was writing about how do we speak truth into a world where people are pursuing these idols of technology and personal freedom, and they're doing that in a context that's disruptive all the time. We're always distracted by the latest thing, by our phones, by our devices. And Alan Noble said that it would take something really major to get people's attention back. And I think certainly in our setting, we are seeing that people are paying attention once again to prayer, to church, to the Bible. People have sort of sensed that life can't go on as normal, and that many of the things that they took for granted, the narrative that they were living by, wasn't really serving them in this moment. So there's been a real opportunity there, I think, to sort of speak clearly about where we can find meaning and hope in difficult times.
Yeah. I absolutely agree that when our Western uh, narrative, which we are all shaped by, like me too, very personally. And it's not something out there. But when these do not serve or do not work the way they are to be working, there is this chance or this space to introduce the biblical narrative, the biblical meta-narrative about life and the meaning of life. And basically, all the time there are two meta-narratives which clash in our lives and in the life of our churches. Basically, when we are dwelling in the biblical narrative, there is one comprehensive worldview, and then we are all shaped by the specific culture's narrative, which is always also comprehensive and wants to shape all our lives. And so now we can see this, what is called missional encounter, more clearly. And practically what I try to do with that, I don't know how it will go. Well, one thing is that even in sermons, I can do this analysis and try to see people, what's happening. In my view, it means that God judged these idols and made them vulnerable and made them public and made their weakness very on display. And I think it's very interesting to talk about how we can talk about any judgment language in this situation, because it's easy to say, no God, no judgment at all, or this is the judgment of God because of this or that. Basically, what I see is that God is just showing us, and in some ways, in that way, judges us, shows us what we have built, we have been building our lives on. And it's kind of judgment in terms of his desire to make us more free, more available for him, more dependent on him, and so on. So that's how sometimes I use that in sermons. But the other thing is I'm trying to shape with two pastor friends now a course, like a course for seekers, like a 7-part video series based on that. So at first showing that how what is worldview and how narrative works in all of our lives, and then basically talking about that this is this space now. There is something is happening right now that we need to. All of us want to make meaning of what's happening. I mean, there is much more openness in society about that. And then starting with here, we can talk about the biblical narrative, the big story, the Western culture, and then we will go to very practical things. What does work mean when people are losing jobs and so on? What does work mean in the Western cultural narrative and in the biblical narrative? Just give them ideas so that they can start to talk about it. Same with relationships, thinking about in the background about families or yeah, and things like that, where which is again under pressure. And then I think a very important part will be we need to start talking about suffering. So how we make meaning of any suffering in that culture. Yeah. So try to do something with this like that.
Yeah, I really like that, Andras. That's excellent. Just the way that your thoughts go in and forming a course that's kind of designed. You're not just taking something off the shelf. You're taking something that's a response to what we're facing right now, which is a kind of shift in paradigm, I think, that's going to cause a lot of rethinking and retelling of the story.
Yeah.
I've gone with my people a lot to Revelation, which I've never done in the past. And you know how the city of man has claimed our loyalty, our affection, and our trust, and yet, as you say, this crisis has shown its fragility and its transience, and that Revelation is giving us a picture of the true King who reigns over history and whose kingdom is still coming, but is so different in its values and its ways to what we would normally want to embrace.
Yeah, I think you guys hit on something really important, which is how we as church leaders communicate this. I mean, to believers and to non-believers, because I think the way the way we communicate to our churches is the way they will probably communicate to their friends. And Yeah, thinking along those lines. I mean, it's great you're coming out with this course because you're automatically contextualizing it, for your people, your culture, and how that is one of those in Western culture, sensitive subjects about judgment, and you talked about kind of the both sides of the horse, as they would say in German. Um, how are ways that we can communicate that to people, that there is a sense of a need that we need to be waking up to, that God is still in control, and that he's allowing many things to happen, and he may be speaking through things, but on the other hand, um, not prescribing or acting like we would know every idea that's in God's mind. I mean, there's a big tension there for me, even when I say that, like a fear to say too much, but also a fear to not say anything. Maybe that's my own idol, my own fear. But
I think, one of the great issues here is death, and we certainly live in a death avoiding culture where death isn't really spoken about or thought about or discussed in any particular way. And suddenly it's all over the newspapers, it's all over the headlines. People are fearful, angry, people are being bereaved. There's a breakdown in how we normally interact around death and deal with bereavement and comfort each other. And so I think people have a sense that this is a moment where things are different, and there is a permission to speak about things that people were actually quite allergic to previously. And there is no way that we can proclaim this as a particular divine judgment on certain cultural issues. But there's a really personal element to it that I think that people have been reminded of their own kind of finiteness, their own mortality, and that what they valued in life has now been taken away so easily that their narrative, as Andras has been saying, no longer makes a lot of sense to them. So I think that does give us permission to come to some of these harder issues and say, God's got something really helpful and merciful to say in the face of those hard things.
something that I was interested in to hear from you all, if you have one, is there like a specific quote, and maybe outside of the Bible, that has influenced you, that you like, that speaks about idols or even cultural idols?
Yeah, I put down the well-known saying of Archbishop William Temple: religion is what you do with your solitude. So where are my thoughts? Where my thoughts are wandering? In which directions are they going when I'm not a pastor? I don't need to do all the things I need to do. And very personally, I'm struggling in these weeks because at first, I'm not the lead pastor of our church, and basically my main ministry is not the local church anymore, but a kind of mission officer with our denomination. So when the quarantine came, most of my works were gone, and almost all my fellow pastors were very busy of going online and trying to react to this situation and so on, and I just had basically nothing to do for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, or very little to do. So personally, I really faced, and I knew about it, but I faced again that how much work is an idol, how much through work I get how people value me, or I get my, that they accept me, they love me, they value me. What I do is good, and seeing our pastor, who was not very open to he was doing everything on his own pretty much. I really had feelings of envy and bitterness and who am I and what I'm doing here at all. So I was struggling with that. And the reason I link this to this quote about religion is what you do with your solitude, because it would be, and it's about idolatry, because it would be so easy to say for me that basically, even in my solitude and long walks, very often I'm thinking about God's things and churches and what should be done, how we can react on that situation and so on. And it would be so easy to say that, yes, that's how faithful I am. But even that can be linked to that idol, that I always need to come up with something. I always need to think into the future. And basically I need to learn just to be with God and be simple and not be important. And so it's happening. I'm struggling with that quite a lot. Yeah. So that's my personal idol in that situation and my quote right now.
Thanks for opening up about that. What about you, Neil?
Well, very similar to Andras in some ways, that I think as pastors or Christian leaders, we have to kind of help lead people in this whole process of self-reflection and dealing with the idols of our hearts. And the idol of productivity is so important, I think, in ministry. You know, that we feel we have to be busy, productive, seen to be doing things, running meetings. So suddenly when all your meetings are gone and your diary is sort of sitting empty in front of you, it's quite disorientating. And I think I would say, you know, just to guys watching this, for those of us who are in ministry, so much of our identity is in ministry rather than in Jesus. And that this is just a really good reminder that if that's where we're drifting, finding worth in what we do in terms of ministry and what recognition we get for our ministry, if that's where we're drifting, this is a really good call back to humility, to say, like, I'm nothing, I'm powerless. And I read a really nice blog piece a while ago, early on in this process, on replacing the idea of productivity with that of fruitfulness. You know, and how will the Spirit bear fruit in my life in this season, you know, with patience and with waiting on God and prayerfulness and showing kindness to the people who are locked up with me 24/7. And you know, I think that's just a great way for us as pastors to begin to say, in hard times, we'll all go to different idols for comfort or for sense of worth. So where are you going? What are you missing? What's making you feel insecure right now or anxious? So my quote was from David Powlison, who's a biblical counselor who sadly passed away last year. And Powlison just said this. He says, has something or someone besides Jesus the Christ taken title to your heart's trust, preoccupation, loyalty, service, fear, and delight? So, has something or someone besides Jesus the Christ taken title to your heart's trust, preoccupation, loyalty, service, fear, and delight? So it's Andras's quote, but I think it's going in the same direction, probably, and taking us to the same place.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can identify, definitely with what you said about, placing our devotion and our worth in our ministry, and thinking like over the years, when you, especially if you're preaching or you come to a worship service, and and a lot of us won't say it, but we really are affected every week by the swell or the shrinking of the crowd. And now we're coming to a situation where some churches, some places are kind of opening back up and allowing some worship services, but they're saying you can only have 1/3 of the people. So the only thing that it's helped is it's kind of spread people out in the worship service room a little bit, but it hasn't helped our egos at all. And I think that's in some ways it's kind of a blessing, that yeah, we do care about people, and we would love to see a lot of people coming to hear the gospel and to be giving their lives every day to Christ, and seeing that in one of those services, kind of the fruit of that. But in the end, just I think this idea of I can be doing this for me sometimes and not for God, or even my doing it for God can become its own idol because I'm not really doing it for Him.
Yeah,
I'm doing.
I think vanity is such a huge ministry idol. That what do people think of me? Do they like me? Do they like what I'm saying? Am I approved of? And we kind of measure the worth of what we're doing by that. And so, how many of us are looking at our YouTube hits now that we're doing online church with a great deal of anxiety and comparing ourselves to other churches, like how many views have they had and how many views have I had? And so it's a good time to stop and I think ask God to humble us and take us away from that view of ministry and back to something that's much more kind of wholesome.
So what do you think? Because you guys are both church planters, have been church planters. What is specific maybe to a church planter during this time, an idol that could, some idols that could be coming up that could be a struggle, that may be even different than someone who's pastoring a church that's existed for a long time? I know that wasn't on the list of questions, but
it's a great question. I need a minute to ponder it, so I'm going to give it to my quick-witted brother in Budapest, Andras, first.
I cannot say what could be a specific idol. I think all those we are talking about. But I can think of a church planter who they just started having services every second week, and they in January, and actually they wanted to start it earlier, but they couldn't find an adequate meeting place. So that's why they couldn't start like December. So finally they got a meeting place. They just started meeting every second Sunday, kind of trying out how it works. And they were planning to really open up at Easter. And now everything is gone. Even the little they started is gone right now. So, I mean, I don't know what the idol is, but I know how desperate this situation is, that you need to sing and pray and get to be encouraged to start it again all over. And even then, you don't know how you will be able to do that with, when I'm thinking about that, like in Budapest, we can start having services this Sunday. So, but the way you said, Kelly, and so we will be there in masks and cannot hug each other, or we cannot sing at the services. So, I mean, how you start a church? How you will start building relationships and trust with new people and building a fellowship when everything is just frozen like that? I mean, I don't know what the idol is, but it is a very desperate situation for planters, I think. So, but yeah, the only thing which stays there is that God is still doing something through that. So I think maybe we just pray or wait and see what can come out of that. But I have no answer.
Yeah, it puts us in a really vulnerable spot.
Yeah, I think waiting is really hard for kind of us in our culture and society, and God is teaching us to wait, and that's about recognizing our utter dependence on Him, and that's at the lot of the issues of idolatry, isn't it? That I don't want to depend on God. I want to depend on me and what I can do and what I can achieve, and that's at the heart of our rebellion against God. Is that we want to be our own gods, and so I think having to wait is such a hard lesson, but a good lesson. The fact that our plans are getting torn up is hard for us. I think plans are a form of technology and they're good. Technology is a blessing. It's great to plan. But if that's what we depend on rather than depending on God, then of course we've lost track. So it's a learning season and a humbling season for many of us. And one of the interesting things for many of our church planters is that they work in quite kind of blue collar areas with lots of social deprivation and addiction issues. And trying to stay in touch with addicts during this time has been really difficult, and a lot of real worries have come with that pastorally. So I think it's actually been a really hard time for a lot of our planners, to see plans disrupted, to lose connection with people who are just beginning to connect with church. And that's really having to throw us back to waiting, to trusting God's bigger plan, to prayerfulness, and just to being taught so clearly it's God who brings the fruit, it's God who brings the kingdom, and we're just his servants in that process.
Yeah, and speaking of that vulnerability, that was really good. I just think of, in those times in my own life, and I've seen others, is that when we are coming through a difficult period, or something didn't work out the way it was, I have the opportunity to kind of throw myself or on the gospel and cling to God and what He's done, and really the identity that He's giving me. But I always have this temptation or this strong pull that says, go and fix it. So maybe, I don't know, even if it was fundraising and you were short or something, then the immediate pull is to, pull an all-nighter and work around the clock and call everyone and try to get it fixed. And um, I think what you said is so really hit the point on waiting. That sometimes waiting is the most godly thing that we can do. So somebody told me one time, sometimes taking a nap is the most godly thing you can do. So yeah, so that's really really good. I've got. We could talk a lot more, and I know that you guys have a lot more great stuff to say, but to kind of keep the time in.
Yeah.
I want to throw out some real quick top words, and you can just kind of give me thumbs up, thumbs down, positive, negative, and if you want, you could give one sentence on each topic, or you can say undecided or neutral, something like that. All right. These are fun. They're not specifically connected to idols, but they may have something to do with them.
Go for it.
All right. Online church, positive, negative, undecided. Online church.
Both.
Yeah, hybrid church.
All right. Virtual discipleship.
Sucks.
No way.
Okay. Online prayer meetings.
It's very much needed.
Amazingly, they've been great.
All right. Digital evangelism campaign.
Got a headache now all of a sudden.
It's linked to a local church. Yes.
Okay. All right. Live stream. How do you feel about that word right now?
Live stream is making me a nervous wreck on a Sunday morning.
Yeah.
It didn't work in our church at all because of technological problems. So we started recording.
Okay. The next one, I'll put them together because there's a little ecclesiology in here. But online baptism and Lord's Supper.
Yes to the first, no to the second.
Yeah. For us, the vice versa. No baptism and yes, Lord's Supper in homes.
Okay, interesting.
Oh, controversy.
Great experiences.
That could be a second Zoom call. Okay. And the very last one, and this, I really want your emotion on this one. What's the emotion that comes to your mind at the beginning? And that is Zoom meeting.
Exhausting.
Yeah, it's been draining, really draining.
Great. Well, you guys will get to compare those answers with a couple other people who had some of the same terms. So I hope that'll be fun.
Good fun.
Thank you guys so much for being here. And again, I know that if people watching want to have more questions, that these guys are probably an email away. So they might have some more information or some resources or something more on idols or really some of the people that they mentioned if you're trying to follow those people down. Thank you guys so much for being on this call today.
Thank you.
Sorry,
Great.
it was great to be with you and with Neil too.
Yeah.